The monitors flatlined at 3:47 a.m. Every doctor in the trauma ward stepped back. Raffaele Moretti, the most feared Mafia boss in Rome, was dead. 31 years old, 6 bullets pulled from his body, heart stopped for 4 minutes and counting. The surgeon called it. Time of death, 3:47. But no one told the baby. 8-month-old Zara, strapped to her father's chest because the night sitter never showed, squirmed free from the Omega nurse's carrier, crawled across the blood-streaked floor, and laid her tiny head on the dead man's chest. And under her cheek, impossibly, his heart began to beat again. Hi, besties. Welcome back to this channel. If you're ready for this ride, please like this video, share it with someone who needs it, hit subscribe, and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from today. Now let's get into it. The emergency ward at San Giovanni Hospital was not a place for miracles. It was a place for blood, for chaos, for the kind of broken bodies that arrived at 3 in the morning with no names and too many bullet wounds. The fluorescent lights buzzed. The floors were always damp. And the nurses who survived more than a year on the night shift developed a particular kind of numbness, a necessary armor against the parade of violence that rolled through those doors every week. Kofi Mensah had worked the night shift for 14 months, and his armor was thick. He was 25, Ghanaian-born, and had been living in Rome for 3 years on a nursing visa that required renewal every 12 months. He was tall and lean, with dark skin that held warm undertones even under the hospital's harsh lights, close-cropped hair, a strong jaw, and eyes so deep brown they appeared black in certain angles. He moved through the ward with quiet efficiency, checking vitals, changing dressings, calming patients who woke up screaming, and he did it all with a gentleness that his colleagues found remarkable given the brutality of the setting. He was also an Omega, a male Omega, rare, underestimated, and constantly navigating a world that didn't quite know what to do with him. In the hierarchy of the hospital, alphas were surgeons and department heads. Betas were administrators. Omegas were nurses, orderlies, caretakers. Kofi had graduated top of his nursing class. He could have been more. The world had decided he would be this. He had stopped fighting that particular battle. He had a bigger one. Zara, his 8-month-old daughter, adopted 4 months ago from a colleague who could no longer care for her, was the axis around which Kofi's entire universe turned. She was small and round and perfect, with enormous dark eyes and a halo of soft curls that made strangers stop and smile. She was also, tonight, strapped to Kofi's chest in a baby carrier hidden beneath his scrubs, because his night sitter had texted a cancellation 45 minutes before his shift, and his backup options numbered exactly 0. He had done this before. Twice. Both times, Zara had slept through the entire shift, and no one had noticed. Tonight would be the same. It would not be the same. The call came at 3:12 a.m. Incoming trauma. Multiple GSWs. Male, early 30s. No ID. Arriving in 5. Kofi was already moving, gloves on, tray prepped, station ready. He pressed one hand to the carrier beneath his scrubs to steady Zara, who stirred but didn't wake. Around him, the trauma team assembled with the grim choreography of people who had done this too many times. The ambulance doors crashed open. The gurney came through fast, 2 paramedics running, a third squeezing a bag valve mask, all of them shouting numbers that told a story of catastrophic damage. 6 entry wounds, massive blood loss, BP crashing, pulse thready, and on the gurney, covered in blood and barely alive, was the most beautiful man Kofi had ever seen. Even destroyed, even gray-skinned and dying, there was something about him that stopped the breath in Kofi's lungs. A face like a Roman sculpture, sharp jaw, aristocratic nose, full mouth now slack with unconsciousness. Dark hair matted with blood. A body that, beneath the gore, was clearly powerful. Broad shoulders, strong hands now limp at his sides. And an alpha sense so intense that even in its fading state, it pressed against Kofi's senses like a hand on his chest. There was no time to process it. The team descended. Kofi fell into his role, handing instruments, monitoring output, moving with the rhythm of the trauma. He worked for 35 minutes straight, his hands steady, his focus absolute, Zara sleeping against his heart. Then the monitors flatlined. The sound was singular, a long, unbroken tone that meant the end of everything. The surgeon worked for another 3 minutes, then stopped, stepped back, removed his gloves. Time of death, Dr. Valenti said, his voice flat with exhaustion. 3:47 a.m. The team exhaled. Someone turned off the overhead surgical light. The room dimmed to the blue-gray glow of monitoring equipment that no longer had anything to monitor. And Kofi stood by the instrument tray, looking at the dead man on the table, and felt something he could not explain. A pull, deep and visceral, like a fishhook behind his sternum. An omega response to an alpha presence. Except there was no presence anymore. The man was gone. His scent was fading. His chest was still. Zara woke up. She did it the way she always did, silently, with a small wriggle and then immediate, curious alertness. She pushed against the carrier beneath Kofi's scrubs, worked one arm free, then the other. Before Kofi could react, she had squirmed out of the carrier entirely and dropped, not onto the floor, but onto the gurney beside the dead man. Kofi lunged for her, but Zara was already moving, crawling across the sterile sheet with single-minded purpose. She reached the man's chest. She stopped. She looked at his face for a long moment, as if making a decision. Then she lowered her head and rested her cheek directly over his heart. Zara, no. Kofi reached for her. The monitor blipped. Everyone froze. The blip came again, and then it became a rhythm, weak, irregular, but unmistakably a heartbeat. The flat line on the screen shuddered, spiked, and resolved into a pattern that made Dr. Valeni drop his clipboard. That's not possible, the surgeon whispered. But it was happening. Beneath the tiny head of an 8-month-old baby, the dead man's heart was beating. The next 6 hours were controlled pandemonium. The trauma team scrambled back into position. The patient, still unidentified, was stabilized, transfused, and moved to the ICU. His vitals, while fragile, held. His heart, against every medical precedent, continued to beat. Zara was removed from his chest, which she protested loudly. Kofi stood in the hallway outside the ICU at dawn, holding his screaming daughter, and tried to understand what had happened. He couldn't. The doctors couldn't. The monitors had been checked and rechecked. The patient had been clinically dead for over 4 minutes. And then a baby had touched him, and he had come back. Marco Ferretti, the hospital's head of security, appeared beside Kofi with an expression that suggested the night was about to get significantly more complicated. We identified the patient, Marco said. His name is Raffaele Moretti. The name landed like a bomb in a quiet room. Even Kofi, who avoided the news, who kept his head down, who lived in a world of shift schedules and baby formula, knew that name. Raffaele Moretti, the Lion of Rome, head of the Moretti crime family, which controlled half the city's infrastructure, most of its ports, and an unknown percentage of its politicians. He was 31 years old, reputed to be brilliant, ruthless, and impossible to kill. Apparently, that last part was literal. The police want to talk to everyone who was in the room, Marco continued. His people are already here. 6 men in suits who look like they could bench press this building. And there's a woman from the family requesting a private room and full security. Kofi looked at Zara, who had stopped crying and was now chewing on his badge lanyard. He looked at the ICU door. Behind it, a Mafia boss was alive because his baby daughter had rested her head on a dead man's chest. I need to go home, Kofi said. After you talk to the police. The police interview was brief. Kofi told them what happened, minus the part about Zara being present on the ward, which he omitted with the smooth precision of a parent who had learned to edit reality for survival. The official story became a simpler version. The monitors flatlined, the team called it, then spontaneous cardiac activity resumed. Rare, but documented. A medical anomaly. No one mentioned the baby. The security cameras in the trauma room had conveniently malfunctioned, a glitch that Marco attributed to the hospital's aging systems, but that Kofi suspected had a more deliberate origin. He went home at 7 a.m., put Zara in her crib, and slept for 3 hours before his phone woke him. Unknown number. He answered out of habit. Mr. Mensah. The voice was female, crisp, Italian accented, and carried the authority of someone who was not accustomed to hearing the word no. My name is Lucia Moretti. I am Rafael's sister. I understand you were the nurse on duty when my brother was brought in last night. I was part of the trauma team, yes. I also understand that something unusual occurred. Something involving a child. Kofi's blood went cold. I don't know what you're referring to. A pause. Then, more gently, Mr. Mensah. The security cameras did malfunction, but the audio monitors in the room did not. I have a recording of Dr. Valeni saying, and I quote, "That's not possible," followed by the sound of a baby crying. I am not calling to threaten you. I am calling because my brother is alive when he should not be, and I believe your child is the reason. I would very much like to meet you. Kofi met Lucia Moretti at a cafe 3 blocks from the hospital the following afternoon. She was not what he expected. She was small, sharp-featured, and dressed in the kind of understated elegance that whispered money rather than shouting it. She ordered espresso. She looked at Zara, perched on Kofi's hip in a carrier, with an expression that was equal parts curiosity and something harder to read. She's beautiful, Lucia said. Thank you. How old? 8 months. Lucia studied the baby. Then Kofi. You're an Omega. Yes. And the baby is adopted. How did you? I did my research. She said it without apology. Kofi Mensah. Ghanaian national. Nursing degree from Accra, certified in Rome. Male Omega, unmarried. Sole guardian of one dependent. Your visa is up for renewal in 4 months. She set down her espresso cup. My brother has been unconscious for 36 hours. His vitals are stable, but he won't wake. The doctors are calling it a coma. They can't explain it, just like they can't explain how he came back. What does this have to do with me? I want you to be his private nurse. Kofi said no. He said no in the cafe. He said no again when Lucia called that evening. He said no a third time when a black car appeared outside his apartment the next morning with a driver who said simply, Miss Moretti would like another conversation. He said no because Raffaele Moretti was a mafia boss. Because the world that surrounded him was violence and blood and the kind of danger that devoured people like Kofi without noticing. Because he had a daughter and a visa and a life that was small and fragile in his, and he would not shatter it for a man he didn't know, no matter how impossibly his heart had restarted. He said no until Thursday. On Thursday, his visa renewal was flagged. An error in his paperwork, a missing signature, a misfiled form, put his residency status in jeopardy. The immigration office gave him 30 days to resolve it. The legal aid clinic he'd been using was backed up for 6 weeks. Lucia called on Thursday evening. She did not mention the visa issue. She didn't need to. The position comes with full legal representation, she said, for any personal matters. Additionally, private security, health insurance for you and your daughter, and compensation that is significantly above hospital rates. Did you flag my visa? A pause. I protect my family, Mr. Mensah. My brother is alive because of your child. That makes you family, whether you like it or not. That sounds like a threat. It's an invitation. The door is open. Walk through it, or don't. But my brother is dying slowly in a hospital bed, and the only time his monitors show improvement is when the nurses mention a baby was nearby. Explain that, and I'll leave you alone. Kofi couldn't explain it. No one could. He said yes. The Moretti estate sat on a hill east of Rome, a 17th-century villa surrounded by cypress trees, stone walls, and the kind of security infrastructure that disguised itself as landscaping. Kofi arrived on a Saturday morning with Zara in his arms, a duffel bag over his shoulder, and a distinct feeling that he was walking into a world from which there might be no easy exit. Rafael had been moved from the hospital to a private medical suite on the estate's ground floor. The room was state-of-the-art, monitoring equipment, ventilation systems, for stations, all installed within a space that also featured marble floors, arched windows, and a view of the Roman hills that belonged in a painting. The man himself lay in the center of it, unconscious, connected to machines, and yet somehow still radiating presence. Kofi had seen coma patients before. They looked diminished, smaller than their waking selves, reduced by stillness. Raffaele Moretti looked like a sleeping god. Even pale, even wounded, even motionless, there was something about him that filled the room. His alpha scent, muted by sedation but still present, was cedar and smoke and something dark, like aged wine. Kofi set up his station, checked vitals, adjusted the 4-drip, changed dressings on the 6 healing wounds with steady, professional hands. Then Zara, who had been quiet in her carrier, began to fuss. Kofi lifted her out, held her on his hip, and continued his work one-handed, a skill every single parent mastered within the first month. But Zara wasn't interested in being held. She was straining toward the bed, toward Rafael. Her small body leaned so far that Kofi had to adjust his grip to keep her from diving. No, Zara. That's a patient. Zara didn't care. She reached with both hands, making the urgent sound that meant want, now, give. Against his better judgment, against every professional protocol he knew. Kofi sat on the edge of the bed and let Zara crawl onto the mattress. She moved with purpose, navigating the tubes and wires with an instinct that an 8-month-old should not have possessed, and settled herself against Raphael's side. She placed her head on his chest, just below the collarbone, and sighed. The monitors changed. Heart rate, stronger. Blood pressure, improved. Oxygen saturation, climbing. The numbers shifted like a tide coming in, slow, steady, undeniable. Kofi stared at the screens, then at his daughter, then at the unconscious man beneath her. "What are you?" he whispered to Zara. She didn't answer. She was already asleep. Over the following days, a pattern established itself. When Zara was near Raphael, his vitals improved. When she was taken away, they declined. The correlation was absolute and inexplicable. The estate's private physician ran every test available and concluded, with visible frustration, that there was no medical explanation. "It's like she's an anchor," Dr. Conti said, reviewing the data. "His body knows she's there, responds to her presence. I've never seen anything like it." Neither had Kofi, but he had read about it, in the old texts, the ones that predated modern science, the ones that spoke of omega bonds and alpha connections in terms that medicine had long since dismissed as folklore. The idea that an omega's child could form a bridge, a tether, between life and death for an alpha whose spirit was between worlds. He didn't believe in folklore, but he believed in his daughter's heartbeat next to a dead man's, and the way that dead man had started breathing. So he let Zara sleep on Rafael's chest every afternoon. He sat beside the bed and monitored both of them, the baby and the boss, and tried not to think about the way Rafael's face looked in the afternoon light. Tried not to notice the architecture of his hands, or the way his dark lashes lay against his cheeks, or the faint furrow between his brows that suggested he was fighting his way back even in unconsciousness. He tried. He failed. On the 9th day, Rafael opened his eyes. Kofi was changing in 4-bag, Zara asleep on the bed beside Rafael, when the alpha's monitors spiked sharply. Kofi turned. Rafael's eyes were open, dark, unfocused, blinking against the light. His gaze moved slowly around the room. Found the ceiling, the windows, the machines. Then it found Zara, curled against his side. He stared at her for a long moment. Then his eyes moved to Kofi. The impact was physical. Kofi felt it in his chest, his stomach, the base of his spine. A wave of alpha recognition so powerful it nearly buckled his knees. Rafael's eyes were dark brown, nearly black, and even clouded with confusion and pain. They carried a weight that pinned Kofi in place. "Who?" Rafael's voice was a ruin, cracked, barely audible. "Who are you?" "Kofi Mensah. I'm your nurse." His voice was steady. His hands were not. "You've been unconscious for 9 days. You were shot 6 times. You died on the operating table and came back. How are you feeling?" Rafael processed this with the slow blinks of a man surfacing from deep water. His gaze dropped to Zara again. One hand, the one not connected to N4, moved with agonizing slowness until his fingers touched the baby's curls. Zara stirred, made a small sound, and burrowed closer. "Whose baby?" he whispered. "Mine." Rafael looked at Kofi again. This time, his gaze traveled, over Kofi's face, his jaw, his throat, his shoulders. An alpha's assessment, instinctive and thorough, and underneath it something else. Something that had nothing to do with threat assessment and everything to do with the way his pupils dilated when they reached Kofi's eyes. "You're an omega," Rafael said. "Yes. You're beautiful." Kofi blinked. "You have 6 healing gunshot wounds, and you've been in a coma for 9 days. I think the medication is affecting your judgment." The corner of Rafael's mouth twitched. It wasn't quite a smile, but it was close. Recovery was slow and brutal. Raffaele Moretti was not a good patient. He was impatient, stubborn, and possessed the particular arrogance of a man who had controlled everything in his life and found being bettered in a personal insult. He tried to stand on day 2 of waking. He collapsed. He tried again on day 3. He collapsed again. He cursed in Italian, fluently and creatively, and Kofi stood over him with crossed arms and an expression of absolute zero tolerance. "Get back in the bed. I don't take orders. You do from me. I'm your nurse. Get back in the bed or I will sedate you, and I have the legal authority to do so." Rafael looked up at him from the floor. He was in pain. It was etched into every line of his face, but beneath it was something unexpected. Amusement. Genuine, startled amusement. "You're threatening to sedate a mafia boss." "I'm promising to sedate a patient who won't follow medical instructions. The mafia part is irrelevant to me." Rafael studied him for a long moment. Then he reached up a hand. Kofi took it and pulled him upright. The contact, palm to palm, Rafael's larger hand engulfing his, sent a jolt through both of them that neither acknowledged. "Has anyone ever told you," Rafael said, leaning on him as they moved back to the bed, "that you have the bedside manner of a drill sergeant?" "Frequently. Get in the bed." He got in the bed. He also, Kofi noticed, didn't let go of his hand for several seconds longer than necessary. Over the following 2 weeks, Kofi learned things about Raffaele Moretti that didn't match the legend. The legend said he was cold. In reality, he ran hot. Fevers from the healing wounds. Yes, but also in temperament. He argued with his doctors. He demanded updates from his organization that Lucia filtered before they reached him. He spoke on the phone in rapid Italian that shifted to perfect English when he noticed Kofi listening, as if he wanted to include him. The legend said he was heartless. In reality, he watched Zara with an expression of bewildered tenderness that he clearly thought he was hiding and was not. When the baby crawled to him during afternoon checks, he would go still, the same absolute stillness Kofi had seen in the ICU, and let her settle against him as if she were made of something more fragile than glass. He learned her sounds, the hungry cry, the tired fuss, the delighted squeal she made when she discovered something new. He learned them faster than most people did. "She's drooling on me," he said one afternoon, his voice carefully neutral. "She's teething. It happens. On a silk pillowcase. Would you like me to move her?" A pause. Then no. The legend said he felt nothing. In reality, he felt everything. Kofi could see it. Every time their hands brushed during a dressing change. Every time Kofi leaned close to check his pupils and Rafael's breath went unsteady. Every time Kofi walked into the room, Rafael's eyes tracked him with an intensity that made the air feel thinner. The pull between them was magnetic. Chemical. Alpha and Omega. Yes, biology was part of it. But not all of it. Not even most of it. What drew Kofi wasn't Rafael's designation. It was the way he held Zara like she was the most important thing he'd ever touched. The way he asked about Kofi's studies, his visa, his life in Rome. Questions sharp with intelligence and soft with genuine interest. The way he looked at Kofi like he was a problem worth solving, a puzzle worth understanding, a person worth knowing. And Kofi was terrified of all of it. By the third week, Rafael was mobile, slowly, painfully, with a cane he despised and physical therapy sessions he endured with the grim determination of a man who had never accepted limitation. He moved through the estate like a king reclaiming his throne, staff straightening as he passed, conversations halting, the entire household recalibrating around his waking presence. But he always came back to the medical suite, always found reasons to be where Kofi was. "Your dressing needs changing," he'd say, appearing in the doorway while Kofi organized supplies. "I changed it 2 hours ago. It feels wrong. It feels fine. I'm a nurse. I know when a dressing needs changing." He'd sit anyway. Watch Kofi work. Watch Zara play on the rug. And Kofi would feel those dark eyes on him like sunlight through a window, warm, persistent, impossible to ignore. The tension broke 3.5 weeks after Rafael woke. A man arrived at the estate, Dr. Filippo Mancini, a specialist called in for a second evaluation of Rafael's recovery. He was alpha, young, good-looking, and he took one look at Kofi and decided to make his interest known. It was subtle at first. A hand on Kofi's lower back while reviewing charts. A comment about his remarkable composure. A smile held a beat too long. Kofi handled it the way he handled all unwanted attention, with polite deflection and professional distance. He didn't notice Rafael watching from the doorway. He didn't see the way Rafael's hand tightened on his cane until his knuckles went white. He didn't hear Rafael's breathing change. But he heard what happened next. "Dr. Mancini." Rafael's voice cut across the room like a blade across silk. He was leaning in the doorway, one shoulder against the frame, his posture deliberately casual. His face was not casual at all. His eyes were black ice. "I believe your evaluation is complete." Mancini straightened. "Actually, Mr. Moretti, I had a few more questions for your nurse regarding. Your evaluation is complete." Not louder. Quieter. The kind of quiet that preceded earthquakes. "Your car is waiting. My sister will ensure your fee is settled. Thank you for your time." Mancini left quickly. The smart ones always did. Kofi turned to Rafael. "That was unnecessary. He was just being friendly." He was not being friendly. Rafael's jaw was tight. "He was touching you. He put his hand on my back. He put his hand on you." The words came out rough, possessive, stripped of all pretense. "In my house. In front of me." The air between them ignited. Kofi felt it. The pull, amplified now by weeks of proximity and denial, crackling like static before lightning. "I'm your nurse, Rafael. Not your property. I know that." He took a step closer. Then another. He was still favoring his left side, still healing, but there was nothing weak about the way he moved toward Kofi. "I know you are not my property. I know you are not mine. But I also know that watching another man touch you made me feel something I have not felt in my entire life, and I am not handling it well." Kofi held his ground. "What are you feeling?" "Fury." Another step. "Jealousy." "Fear." He was close now. Close enough that his scent enveloped Kofi completely, cedar and smoke and alpha possession. "Fear that you will leave this house and take your daughter, and I will never see either of you again." Fear that I survived 6 bullets and a flatline only to lose the first person who has made me want to be alive. Rafael, you don't have to say anything. I know what I am. I know what my world is. I know you deserve better than a man who was carried into your hospital full of holes. His voice dropped to something barely audible. But I need you to know that I would take every bullet again. All 6, and 6 more, if it meant I would wake up and see your face. Kofi's breath caught. His hands were trembling. He clasped them behind his back so Rafael wouldn't see, but the Alpha's eyes tracked the movement and softened. Your hands are shaking, Rafael said quietly. I'm aware. Why? Because no one has ever said anything like that to me, and I don't know what to do with it. Rafael reached out, slowly, giving him every chance to step back, and took both of Kofi's hands in his. The trembling didn't stop, but something else began. A warmth. A settling. The feeling of 2 magnets finally allowed to touch. You don't have to do anything with it, Rafael said. Just don't leave. Kofi didn't leave. But he didn't surrender either. He was an Omega who had crossed an ocean alone, adopted a child alone, built a life alone. He did not fold at the first declaration. He needed proof. He needed time. He needed to see the man behind the legend and decide for himself whether the warmth was real or the fever of proximity. Rafael, to his credit, understood this. He didn't push. He didn't pressure. What he did was worse. He was patient. He was patient when Kofi maintained professional distance during checks. He was patient when Kofi refused dinner invitations, then accepted one, then refused the next. He was patient when Kofi spent an entire evening in the library helping Zara practice crawling and Rafael sat in an armchair pretending to read while watching them with an expression that made the housekeeper cry. And he was devastating in the small things. A new edition of a nursing journal Kofi had mentioned once appeared on his bedside table. A humidifier showed up in Zara's nursery, the exact brand Kofi had researched but couldn't afford. A call was made to the immigration office that resulted in Kofi's visa paperwork being expedited, handled, and resolved in 9 days. When Kofi confronted him about it, Rafael said simply, "You shouldn't have to worry about staying in a country that is lucky to have you." Kofi wanted to be angry. He wanted to see it as control, as manipulation, as the alpha impulse to possess and manage. But it wasn't. It was care, attentive, specific, and delivered without expectation. Rafael never asked for anything in return, never leveraged the gifts, never once implied that Kofi owed him. It was the lack of expectation that broke Kofi open. But the estate was not only warmth and quiet tension. It was also a fortress, and fortresses existed because there were enemies at the gates. Kofi learned this on a Wednesday afternoon when he walked into the ground floor study and found Rafael in a meeting with 4 men who looked like they had been carved from granite and dressed by a very expensive tailor. The conversation stopped the moment Kofi appeared. 8 eyes turned to him, assessing, suspicious, cold. One of the men, silver-haired, sharp-eyed, radiating the kind of old-money alpha energy that made rooms feel smaller, spoke in rapid Italian. Kofi caught fragments. Omega. Nurse. Inappropriate. The tone was unmistakable even without full translation. Rafael's response was quiet and devastating. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't stand. He simply said something in Italian, a single sentence, and the silver-haired man went pale, nodded once, and did not speak again for the remainder of the meeting. Later, Kofi asked Lucia what Rafael had said. Lucia smiled. He said, "Speak about him that way again, and this will be the last meeting you attend with functioning legs." He threatened a senior associate. Over me. He threatened his godfather. Over you. Lucia paused. My brother has never, in his entire life, corrected Don Esposito. The man held Rafael at his christening. He is the most senior advisor in the Moretti organization. She looked at Kofi with an expression that was equal parts amusement and gravity. You have turned my brother into a completely different person. I am not entirely sure whether to thank you or be terrified. The following week, Kofi witnessed another side of Rafael's world, one that unsettled him more than the violence. A gala was held at the estate, a gathering of allied families, a show of strength following Rafael's recovery. The house filled with powerful alphas, their partners, advisors, and the particular kind of wealth that didn't need to announce itself because the chandeliers did it for them. Kofi wasn't invited. He was staff. He stayed in the nursery wing with Zara, listening to the distant sound of orchestral music and crystal glasses. He was putting Zara down for the night when there was a knock on the nursery door. A man stood there, young, alpha, expensively dressed, with the kind of sharp beauty that came from good genetics and better skincare. So you're the Omega everyone's whispering about, the man said. He leaned against the doorframe, drink in hand, smile loose and appraising. I'm Enzo Bellini. I work with Rafael. And I have to say, the rumors didn't do you justice. Kofi straightened. Can I help you? I was looking for the terrace. Got lost. He hadn't gotten lost. The nursery wing was on the opposite side of the estate from the terrace. But this is a much better discovery. Are you free after the baby's asleep? The party could use someone worth looking at. I'm working. Excuse me. Enzo didn't move. He smiled wider. Working. Right. Tell me, does the job come with benefits? Because from what I hear, Raffaele Moretti has very particular taste, and you seem to be. Enzo. The voice came from the end of the hallway. Low. Controlled. Vibrating with something that was 1 degree away from violence. Rafael stood at the corridor's end, still in his gala suit. Black, impeccable, tailored to every devastating line of his body. He looked beautiful and terrifying in equal measure. His eyes were locked on Enzo with an intensity that made the younger Alpha take an involuntary step backward. The party is downstairs, Rafael said. You are not downstairs. You are outside the nursery of my household. Correct this. Enzo's bravado evaporated. I was just making conversation. You were making a mistake. Leave before I decide to remember it. Enzo left. Quickly. Rafael remained in the hallway. His chest was rising and falling slightly too fast. His hands, at his sides, were fists. Are you all right? He asked Kofi. The fury in his voice had been replaced by something raw, concern, laced with the particular frustration of a man who wanted to shield someone from a world he couldn't escape. I'm fine. He was harmless. He was not harmless. He was disrespectful. In my home. Near Zara. Rafael's jaw tightened. I should have. You handled it. It's over. Kofi stepped into the hallway. The gala music drifted from below, violins, laughter, the clink of glasses. Rafael, in his perfect suit, with his imperfect fury, looked nothing like a party host and everything like a man standing guard. Come back to the party, Kofi said gently. You have guests. I don't care about my guests. Rafael, I care about you. He said it like it cost him something. Like every syllable was a brick removed from a wall he'd spent a lifetime building. I care about your safety and your comfort and whether some entitled associate made you feel less than what you are. And I know that I have no right to feel this way. You are my nurse. You are not mine. But every instinct I have is telling me to stand in this hallway until everyone in that house understands that you are not to be approached, not to be spoken to with anything less than absolute respect, and not to be looked at the way he was looking at you. The hallway was dim. The music swelled below, and Kofi, standing 3 feet from the most dangerous man in Rome, felt the opposite of fear. He felt home. Go back to the party, he said softly. I'll be here when it's over. Rafael nodded. He turned to leave. Stopped. Turned back. For the record, he said, you look better than anything at that gala. And I've seen the gala. It cost 2 million euros. You and a scrub top outclass it entirely. He walked away before Kofi could respond. Kofi stood in the hallway, hand over his heart, and told himself that what he was feeling was medically inadvisable. His heart disagreed. A month and a half after Rafael woke, danger came calling. The men who had shot Rafael, a rival syndicate led by a man named Santoro, had not disappeared. They had regrouped, and they had learned, through channels that Lucia was still trying to trace, that Raffaele Moretti was alive, recovering, and vulnerable. They had also learned about the Omega nurse. Kofi was at the market in the nearest town, a weekly trip he insisted on making himself, because he refused to become someone who couldn't buy his own groceries, when he noticed the car. Black sedan, tinted windows, following at a distance that was too consistent to be coincidence. He called Marco. Marco called Lucia. Lucia called Rafael. By the time Kofi returned to the estate, Rafael was standing in the courtyard. Standing, without his cane, through what must have been considerable pain, his face a mask of controlled fury that Kofi was learning to recognize as fear wearing armor. You went to the market alone, Rafael said. I go every week. That changes today. Rafael, they were following you. Santoro's men. They know who you are. They know about Zara. His voice cracked on the baby's name. A fracture so small and so devastating that Kofi felt it in his own chest. This is my fault. My world brought this to your door. But I will not, I cannot, let anything happen to you. To either of you. Kofi looked at this man, this alpha, this mafia boss, this impossible person who had died and come back, and was now standing in his courtyard without a cane because the thought of Kofi in danger had overridden every nerve signal in his healing body. Then protect us, Kofi said. But don't cage us. There's a difference. Rafael nodded. I know. I will learn it. Security tripled. Kofi and Zara were given a dedicated guard, discreet, professional, unobtrusive. The estate's perimeter was reinforced. Lucia launched an intelligence operation to locate Santoro. But Santoro found them first. It happened on a Tuesday afternoon. Kofi had taken Zara to the estate gardens, a supervised walk, guard trailing 20 meters behind, the sun warm on the gravel paths. Zara was in her carrier on Kofi's chest, babbling at the cypress trees, when a delivery van pulled through the service gate. The gate should not have been open. It was. Later, they would discover that a guard had been bribed, a fact that would cost the man considerably more than his salary. 3 men emerged from the van. They moved fast, professional, silent. The trailing guard was neutralized before he could radio. Kofi turned at the sound and saw them. 3 alphas in tactical gear, closing the distance. He ran, not away from the estate, toward it, toward the house, toward the security center, toward Rafael. He ran with Zara pressed to his chest, his hand clamped over the back of her head, his feet tearing through gravel. He made it 50 meters before one of the men caught his arm. Kofi didn't scream. He pivoted, drove his elbow into the man's throat, a strike taught in every self-defense course for healthcare workers, and kept running. The man stumbled. The other 2 closed in. Then the estate's alarm system triggered, a sound like the end of the world, sirens ripping through the afternoon peace. Doors burst open. Guards flooded the grounds. And through the front entrance, moving faster than any man with 6 recently healed gunshot wounds had the right to move, came Rafael. He didn't shout orders. He didn't reach for a weapon. He simply walked toward the 3 men with the unhurried pace of someone who knew, with absolute certainty, that he was the most dangerous thing in the garden. His face was empty. His eyes were not. The 3 men looked at Raffaele Moretti, looked at each other, and ran. They didn't make it far. Moretti security intercepted them at the perimeter wall. They were taken into the estate's basement, a part of the property that Kofi had never visited and, he suspected, never wanted to. Rafael crossed the garden to where Kofi stood, Zara crying against his chest, his hands shaking from adrenaline. The alpha reached them and did something Kofi didn't expect. He didn't ask if they were all right. He didn't check for injuries. He simply wrapped both arms around Kofi and Zara, pulled them against his body, and held them. He was trembling. This man, who had survived assassination, who had died and returned, who commanded an empire that stretched across Rome, was trembling because a baby had cried. I will end this, Rafael said into Kofi's hair. Santoro will never threaten you again. I swear it on my life. Your life has already been sworn on enough, Kofi murmured against his chest. Swear on something lighter. Then I swear on her. He pressed his lips to the top of Zara's head. On every smile she's given me. On every night she slept on my chest. I swear on the only thing more valuable than my empire. Kofi closed his eyes and held on. The week that followed was Rafael at full operational capacity, and it was terrifying. He conducted the campaign against Santoro from the estate study, surrounded by advisors, screens, and the quiet menace of a man who had found his reason to fight. Santoro's supply lines were severed within days. His financial infrastructure collapsed within a week. His allies, presented with the choice between loyalty to a losing cause and the attention of a fully awakened Raffaele Moretti, chose survival. Kofi saw none of the violence. He was shielded from it deliberately, surgically, with the kind of care that told him Rafael was drawing a line between the man he was in the study and the man he was in the garden. Both were real. Both were Rafael. But only one was allowed into the spaces where Kofi and Zara lived. He respected that boundary more than he could say. And during the days of war, the small kindnesses continued, quieter now, more urgent, as if Rafael needed to prove that tenderness could coexist with the destruction he was orchestrating. Fresh flowers appeared in Kofi's room every morning. Ghanaian dishes, specifically from Accra, specifically the kind Kofi had described missing, showed up at dinner, prepared by a chef who had clearly been given very detailed instructions. A stack of children's books in Chui arrived for Zara, ordered from a specialty bookshop in London. And one evening, Kofi found a framed photograph on his bedside table, a picture of Zara sleeping on Rafael's chest in the medical suite, taken from the monitoring camera's angle. Someone had printed it, framed it, and placed it where Kofi would see it before sleep. On the back of the frame, in Rafael's handwriting, the moment I started living. Kofi sat on his bed and held the frame and let the tears come. Not sad tears. Not afraid tears. The kind that came when the walls you'd built to survive became the walls keeping you from the thing you wanted most. And Rafael, throughout all of it, never once tried to define what they were. He didn't ask Kofi for labels or commitments. He didn't demand exclusivity or use the word mine, though Kofi could see it in his eyes every time they were in the same room. The possessive, devoted, desperate mind that alphas carried like a second heartbeat. Instead, he just showed up. Every evening after Zara's bedtime. Every morning before his meetings. A presence, steady, warm, unyielding, that said more than any declaration. Kofi found himself listening for his footsteps, looking toward the door when it opened, feeling a physical absence when Rafael was in meetings too long, and worst of all, or best of all, depending on the angle, feeling safe. For the first time since he'd left Accra, for the first time since he'd become a father, for the first time in his adult life, genuinely, completely safe. It was the safety that terrified him most, because safety meant trust, and trust meant loss could destroy him. But the nights were different. After Zara slept, after the guards changed shifts, after the estate settled into its nocturnal quiet, Rafael would find Kofi on the terrace. They would sit in the dark and talk about Rome, about Accra, about fathers and fear, and what it meant to build a family from fragments. "Why did you adopt her?" Rafael asked one night. "Because she needed someone, and I was there." Kofi paused. "Because being a male Omega means the world already decided I'm a caretaker. I figured I might as well care for someone who actually needed it. That's not the real reason." Kofi was quiet for a moment. "The real reason is that I held her and she stopped crying, and I thought, if I can do this one thing, if I can make this one small person feel safe, then maybe everything else was worth it." Rafael turned to look at him. In the moonlight, his expression was open, unguarded in a way that Kofi suspected no one else ever saw. "She saved my life," Rafael said. "And you are saving the rest of me." Kofi leaned into him, shoulder to shoulder. The contact was electric and calming at once. Rafael's arm came around him, carefully, as if asking permission, and Kofi let himself be held. The catalyst came on a night thick with summer heat and the distant sound of thunder. Kofi had put Zara to bed and was walking to his room when he found Rafael in the hallway. He had been at a meeting all day, strategy sessions about Santoro, phone calls with allies, the work of a man reassembling his power. He looked exhausted. His shoulders carried a weight that no physical therapy could address. "Are you all right?" Kofi asked. "No." The honesty was startling. Rafael leaned against the wall, eyes closed. "I spent today planning violence to protect the two people who make me want to be something other than violent. The contradiction is not lost on me." Kofi stepped closer. "Then be something other than violent. Right now? Just for tonight." Rafael opened his eyes. They were dark, deep, and full of everything he'd been holding back. Weeks of restraint, of patience, of wanting without reaching. "If I start, I won't be able to stop." "I'm not asking you to stop." Kofi's voice was barely a whisper. "I'm asking you to start." Rafael kissed him. It was not gentle. It was 6 weeks of denial collapsing like a dam, desperate, consuming, a release of everything they'd been circling. Kofi's back hit the wall and Rafael's body pressed against his, and the world narrowed to heat and breath and the sound of two hearts that had somehow, impossibly, found the same rhythm. What followed was tender and fierce and entirely theirs. Behind a closed door, in the quiet of the Roman night, with the thunder rolling closer, they crossed every remaining distance. Rafael touched Kofi like he was something sacred, reverently, thoroughly, with the attention of a man who intended to memorize every detail. Kofi held nothing back, pulling Rafael out of every shadow with hands that had healed strangers and now healed the one person who mattered most. And when they finally stilled, tangled together in the dark, breathing in unison, the thunder had passed, and the silence was perfect. Kofi woke at dawn. The bed beside him was empty. The fear was instant. A cold wave, Lagos to Rome, every abandonment coated into his bones. He sat up, looked around. Rafael's clothes were gone. The room was quiet. He dressed, fed Zara, went through the morning with mechanical precision, his face composed, his chest hollow. Of course this was how it went. The Alpha took what he wanted and disappeared. The Omega was left to reassemble. He was packing a bag when Lucia appeared in the doorway. "What are you doing?" she asked. "Leaving." "Why?" "Your brother is gone. I assume the arrangement is concluded." Lucia stared at him. Then she laughed, a short, sharp sound of disbelief. "Gone?" Kofi, he's on the West Terrace. He's been on the West Terrace since 5 a.m., on the phone with a jeweler in Florence, trying to describe the exact shade of your eyes so they can match a stone for a ring he wants to commission. Kofi set down the bag. He didn't leave, Lucia said, softer now. He woke up, looked at you sleeping, apparently had some kind of emotional crisis that I will never fully understand, and has been making phone calls ever since. I believe the current count is a jeweler, a lawyer, for your visa, permanently this time, a realtor, and someone about importing Ghanaian tea. She paused. He also called your mother. He called my mother? He speaks passable Chui. Apparently, he's been learning on an app for the past 3 weeks. Kofi sat on the edge of the bed. He pressed his palms to his eyes. He was not going to cry. He was absolutely not going to cry. He cried. He found Rafael on the West Terrace, phone in hand, pacing with the restless energy of a man on a mission. The alpha turned when he heard footsteps, took one look at Kofi's face, and dropped the phone. You're crying, he said, crossing the terrace in 3 strides. Why are you crying? What happened? Who do I need to? You called my mother. Rafael stopped. Yes. In Chui. My pronunciation is apparently terrible. She was very kind about it. You learned Chui. I learned enough Chui to ask her permission and to tell her that her son is the reason I'm alive, and that I intend to spend the rest of my life proving I deserve him. He cupped Kofi's face in both hands. I was going to do this properly. With the ring. I called a jeweler. I know. Lucia told me. I wanted it to be perfect. You learned my mother's language. It's already perfect. Rafael pressed his forehead against Kofi's. I woke up this morning and watched you sleep and realized that I have run a criminal empire, survived 6 bullets, and come back from the dead, and none of it, required as much courage as asking you to stay. So I panicked and started making phone calls. Kofi laughed. It was wet and broken and full of joy. Ask me. Stay? Marry me. Build a life with me. Let me be Zara's father. Let me spend every day earning what you've already given me. Yes. Rafael kissed him, softly this time, with the reverence of a man who understood that what he'd been given was not a conquest, but a gift. On the lawn below the terrace, the morning nurse was walking with Zara in the garden. The baby looked up, saw both of them on the terrace, and clapped her hands. The Santoro threat was resolved 2 weeks later. Rafael's coalition cornered Santoro in Naples. The man was arrested on charges that would keep him imprisoned for decades, not just mafia-related offenses, but financial crimes, trafficking, and the attempted kidnapping of a minor, the last of which Rafael's legal team had meticulously documented. The Moretti territories were secured. The remaining Santoro loyalists scattered or turned informant. The war was over. The evening the news came, Rafael found Kofi in the nursery, rocking Zara to sleep. He stood in the doorway and watched. The baby, the Omega, the quiet ritual of a father singing his daughter to sleep in a language that Rafael was slowly, painstakingly learning. It's done, Rafael said softly. Kofi looked up. Santoro. In custody. His network is dissolved. You're safe. Both of you. He paused. You can leave now if you want. The threat is gone. Your visa is secure. The clinic position is funded regardless of your connection to me. You are free, Kofi. Completely, genuinely free. It was, Kofi realized, the most loving thing Rafael had ever said to him, because it was the hardest. He was offering the open door. No strings. No obligations. Walk away and the gifts stay, the protection stays, the life Kofi had built stays. All Rafael was asking him to take was himself. And if I don't want to leave? Kofi asked. Rafael's control cracked. Just slightly, a tremor in his jaw, a brightness in his eyes. Then I will spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret staying. Kofi set Zara in her crib, crossed the room, and took Rafael's face in both hands. I'm not leaving. I'm never leaving. And I need you to stop giving me exits and start giving me a reason to plan a future. Rafael turned his head and kissed Kofi's palm. I already called a jeweler. Lucia mentioned. I also called a realtor. About a house near the clinic. With a garden for Zara. You're building us a life. I'm trying to deserve the one you already gave me. Kofi continued nursing, not at the hospital, but at the private clinic that Rafael had funded in the eastern quarter of Rome. It served immigrants, refugees, and low-income families who had been invisible to the city's healthcare system. Kofi designed the intake protocols himself. He hired the staff. He ran it with the same quiet efficiency that had made him the best nurse on the night shift, except now the scope was larger and the impact was his own. Rafael visited the clinic once a week. He arrived in his black car, in his perfect suits, and sat in the waiting room reading magazines until Kofi was free for lunch. The patients stared. The staff whispered. Rome's most feared mafia boss sitting in a plastic chair, reading a 3-month-old copy of a parenting magazine, waiting for his omega like any ordinary partner. You know you don't have to sit in the waiting room, Kofi told him. I know. There's a private office. I like the waiting room. The magazines are educational. He held up the parenting issue. Did you know that toddlers need 14 hours of sleep? Zara gets 11. We should discuss this. Kofi stared at him. Then he laughed. A real, full laugh that made 3 patients turn around and 2 nurses exchange knowing smiles. The wedding was held 4 months later in the estate garden, under a canopy of white flowers and Roman sunlight. It was small, family, allies, a handful of trusted friends. The garden had been transformed, strings of delicate lights woven through the cypress trees, white roses lining the stone path, and an arch of jasmine where the vows would be spoken. Kofi's mother flew from Accra. She was small, fierce, and radiated the particular energy of a woman who had raised a son strong enough to cross an ocean alone. When she met Rafael, she held his face in both hands and said, in Twi, "If you hurt my son, they will never find your body." Rafael answered, in his terrible but earnest Twi, "I understand, Mama." She burst into tears, hugged him for 5 minutes, and then demanded a tour of the kitchen because she intended to cook for the reception herself. Lucia stood as witness, holding Zara, who wore a white dress and a single flower tucked into her curls. Zara spent the ceremony reaching for Rafael with both arms, and when Lucia finally relented and set her down, she toddled. She was walking now, unsteady but determined, directly to Rafael and grabbed his pant leg with both fists. He picked her up without breaking eye contact with Kofi, held his daughter in one arm and his future in his gaze. Kofi wore ivory linen, simple, elegant, cut to follow the long lines of his body. Rafael wore black, because he always wore black, but today the darkness served a different purpose. Today it was the frame around the light. They exchanged vows they'd written themselves. Kofi's were precise, measured, and devastating. The words of a man who understood that love was not a feeling but a decision made daily. Rafael's were rough and raw and interrupted twice by his own emotion. He made it through, "I was dead, and you brought me back," before his voice failed him entirely. He finished the rest with his forehead pressed against Kofi's, whispering words that only the two of them would ever hear. When the officiant declared them married, Rafael shifted Zara to one arm, pulled Kofi close with the other, and kissed him while their daughter patted both their faces simultaneously, and the garden erupted in applause. Zara placed her head exactly where she had placed it 10 months earlier, on Rafael's chest, just below the collarbone, directly over his heart. And this time, it was already beating. Steady. Strong. Home. 6 months after the wedding. Autumn had painted the Roman hills in gold and amber. Zara, walking confidently now, speaking in a chaotic blend of Twi, Italian, and a private language only Rafael claimed to understand, was chasing butterflies in the estate garden with the focused intensity of a child who treated the world as an endless, fascinating mission. Kofi sat on the terrace, watching her. The clinic was thriving. His visa was permanent. His mother was threatening another visit, this time for 3 months. Life had become something he hadn't dared imagine a year ago, stable, full. Rafael sat beside him, one hand resting on Kofi's knee, a constant, unconscious point of contact, as if he needed physical proof at all times that this was real, that the garden and the baby and the man beside him weren't some fever dream between one heartbeat and the next. "I have something to tell you," Kofi said. Rafael looked at him. Something in his tone made the alpha go very still. "I'm expecting." The silence lasted 3 heartbeats. Then Rafael's hand moved from Kofi's knee to his stomach. His palm pressed flat. His eyes filled. "Say it again," he whispered. "I'm expecting. You're going to be a father." Again. The sound Rafael made was not a word. It was something more primal, a breath, a laugh, a sob, all compressed into a single exhale. He slid off the bench, knelt on the terrace stones, and pressed his forehead against Kofi's belly. "I was dead," he said, his voice shattered and rebuilt. "I was dead, and your daughter laid her head on my chest and brought me back. And now you're telling me there's going to be another one." "Another one," Kofi confirmed, his fingers threading through Rafael's dark hair. Rafael looked up. His face was wet. His smile was the most beautiful thing Kofi had ever seen. More beautiful than Roman sunsets. More beautiful than Zara's first laugh. more beautiful than anything in a world that had once been cold and violent and empty. Thank you, he said, for saving me. You were already saved, Kofi said softly. The moment she put her head on your chest. We just had to wait for you to wake up. Zara, having captured a butterfly and immediately released it in a gesture of toddler magnanimity, noticed the commotion. She ran across the garden, launched herself at Rafael, and landed against his chest with the full-body confidence of a child who had always known. Before anyone, before the monitors, before the doctors, before the world, that this man's heart belonged to her. And in that garden, in the golden light, a family held each other and proved what a baby on a dead man's chest had whispered 9 months ago. That some hearts don't stop beating. They just wait for the right person to remind them how. Thank you so much for watching, besties. If this story wrecked you in the best way, go ahead and smash that like button, share this with someone who needs a good cry, subscribe to the channel so you never miss an upload, and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from today. I love hearing from you. See you in the next one.